It is Monday. It is the 2nd of June. I'm Moon Kwon-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. Rival parties race across the nation on the eve of a final full day of campaigning to make their closing arguments to voters for a contest whose outcome is increasingly looking all but certain. Top nuclear envoys of South Korea and the U.S. will sit down in Washington today, and the meeting has many wondering whether it would be a turning point for the long-stalled six-party talks to denuclearize North Korea. And a new report shows that not only do Koreans work some of the longest hours in the developed world, but the longest number of years after retirement among OECD member states. We'll have those stories and more, but first let us begin this first Monday of June with the upcoming local elections. Candidates running in the June 4th local elections have hit the home stretch now with just 2 days left until voting day. Korea's rival parties are making their final pushes while downplaying their chances of a big election day victory. Arirang News Kwon Soa explains why.
With just 2 days before voters take to the polls for local elections, rival political parties are trying to figure out where they stand in key swing regions. Although the media is forbidden from releasing opinion polls 6 days before elections, internal polls within the parties are allowed, and they suggest a number of tight races. The last official poll numbers from last week showed the ruling Saenuri Party had the upper hand in 6 regions and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 5. But the ruling party now says it is only certain of victory in 4 regions, and the main opposition party believes it has a high chance in winning in just 3 regions. Both parties are referring to their traditional strongholds. As there are less than 2 days of campaigning left, political analysts believe the two parties are merely trying to boost support and encourage voter turnout by suggesting they are facing unfavorable odds. This was also seen in their reactions to the early voting turnout on Sunday. The ruling Saenuri Party expressed concerns about the high voter turnout among young people, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy said the number wasn't actually that high, considering that the majority of the country's 35,000 soldiers are part of the 16% of young people who voted in advance. Experts say voters in their 40s to early 50s will hold the key to the local elections this year. Kwon Soa, Arirang News.
A 90-day parliamentary investigation into the government's handling of last month's ferry disaster has begun, but it is off to a shaky start. The special parliamentary committee in charge was scheduled to launch the probe by visiting Paengmokgung Harbor in Jindo. This is the site of the ferry accident this Monday afternoon, and offer condolences to the families of the victims. However, committee members belonging to the ruling Saenuri Party are not part of that group. They say they were told by victims' families to push back the date of the visit, which conflicts with claims made by the main opposition party. Now, they argue that the ruling party had other scheduled events for the day. Opposition party members will go ahead with this afternoon's trip. President Park Geun-hye has asked her aides to make sure the delayed appointment of a new prime minister has no effect on state affairs. Now, this came during a meeting of her senior secretaries today, and President Park said her push for sweeping reforms in the public sector can only be achieved when politicians and high-ranking officials lead the way. Introducing her new security advisor, Kim Kwan-jin, now he is currently the defense minister. The Korean leader then asked him to focus on establishing a security posture and preparing for North Korean provocations. And then on government restructuring, the president said the duties of the National Emergency Management Agency and current security ministry will be transferred to the soon-to-be-established Safety Ministry, which will handle both man-made and natural disasters. Now, on a different note, South Korea, the U.S. and China may be edging closer to working out a way to restart the long-stalled six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. This is according to Seoul's nuclear envoy, who is now in Washington for talks with his U.S. counterpart. Choi Yoo-sun reports.
This latest visit to Washington by South Korea's chief nuclear envoy has many wondering if it could offer a turning point for the long-stalled six-party talks to denuclearize North Korea.
Starting with last week's South Korea-China foreign ministers meeting, we've been discussing the conditions to resuming denuclearization talks with countries like the U.S. and China. To that extent, we plan to hold an in-depth discussion with the U.S.
The envoy's remarks hint there may be possible progress on the North Korean nuclear issue ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's expected visit to Seoul this month. When Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently came to Seoul, China asked South Korea to actively push for the talk resumption, to which the South expressed its will to set the pre-talk conditions. In fact, Seoul has taken a more flexible stance on the matter as of late, recognizing there's need for a venue to discuss disarming the North, albeit under a set of conditions. The South Korean negotiator in Washington said this is because the regime conducted 3 nuclear tests, 2 of which took place since the talks were suspended 5 years ago. Therefore, Seoul will seek to mediate between Washington and Beijing as the U.S. insists the North take concrete steps to prove it's ready to give up its nuclear arms before dialogue can reopen. Japan recently agreed to lift sanctions if the North reopens a probe into the abduction of Japanese nationals is another issue of concern. When their nuclear envoys meet Monday, Seoul and Washington are expected to agree that Tokyo should remain committed to the 3 parties' cooperation on resolving the North Korean nuclear issue. 최유선, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, following a landmark agreement last week, Japan will send government officials to North Korea to open an investigation on the Japanese citizens kidnapped by the North decades ago. Now, speaking to Japanese national broadcaster NHK Sunday, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said Tokyo was planning to send officials from its Foreign Affairs Ministry and National Police Agency to Pyongyang. No, so Suga did not elaborate on the size of the delegation or when the officials will go, but he did add that Japan is working with related nations on the final negotiations of the bilateral agreement and that other nations view the abduction cases as human rights issues. Pyongyang agreed to open the investigation in exchange for Tokyo easing economic sanctions on it. North Korea admitted in 2002 that it had abducted 13 Japanese nationals from 1977 to 1983, but Japan claims many more were kidnapped. Now, the icy relations between North Korea and Japan appear to be thawing, evidenced by that recent agreement to reinvestigate the issue of Japanese abductees to the north. But what does it mean for South Korea? Well, our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee sat down with Professor Kent Calder of Johns Hopkins University for his insights.
Dialogue between North Korea and Japan could be a chance for Pyongyang to blunt cooperation among South Korea, the United States, and Japan. In an interview with Arirang News, Professor Kent Calder of Johns Hopkins University said it's important for Tokyo to refrain from making any separate arrangements.
The heart of cooperation, of course, is the Korea and ROK and the United States. But as a supportive element, Japan could be valuable. And so I think our 3 countries can't afford to see North Korea drive a wedge there. That said, generally, I think some pattern of dialogue, as long as there's coordination behind the scenes among the allies, is important.
Professor Calder said dialogue is key to bringing back Japanese citizens kidnapped by North Korea in the 1970s and 80s. 5 Japanese abductees were returned in 2002, but the fate of several others remains unknown.
In other words, there could well be Japanese citizens still alive in North Korea who never will be able to come home if there's not some process of dialogue.
Once fresh investigations begin on the Japanese abductees, Tokyo has promised to lift sanctions and to reconsider humanitarian aid to the north, reducing Pyongyang's dependence on Beijing. Professor Calder said the possible breakthrough is also a rare diplomatic achievement for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, under whom Japan has seen ties sour with China and South Korea.
I think we're at a period where the Abe administration realizes that it can't be a player on Northeast Asian geopolitical issues without some kind of contact or dialogue with DPRK.
Well, there has been Japan-North Korea talks, and Washington has also been conducting 1.5-track informal dialogue with North Korea. Doesn't that leave South Korea out of the picture?
Well, it's very important that South Korea not be left out of the picture. That's absolutely the case. I've felt strongly for a long time that the credibility of the Korea-U.S. alliance is really the cornerstone of our position in the Pacific and one of the key global elements.
Professor Calder stressed the importance of dialogue, but said quiet consultations between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo must remain intact at any cost. 황상희, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery and their families from 8 countries will call on the Japanese government to settle the issue once and for all. The Korean council representing the victims says the former sex slaves, their families, and civic activists plan to demonstrate in front of the Japanese Diet's lower house on this Monday. Now, they will also condemn Tokyo's efforts to deny that Japan had coerced these women into military prostitution by trying to review an apology statement from the early 1990s. The victims from countries like Korea, China, the Philippines, and Indonesia will then give testimonies and deliver a written request to the Japanese government to take legal responsibility and to compensate. Now, North Korea is known to have about 70 submarines in its arsenal, but until recently they had never been seen. Looking to flex its muscles to the outside world, evidently, a documentary has aired on North Korean state television that flaunts the regime's underwater firepower. Park Ji-won has more.
This is part of a recent documentary aired on North Korea's state-run Korean Central Television. It's the first time Pyongyang has publicly released video footage of its strategically important Romeo-class submarines and submarine base. North Korea is currently believed to have about 70 submarines. Around 20 are Romeo-class, their largest submarines, while the rest are of the Shark and Salmon classes.
It seems like North Korea showed its Romeo-class submarines, although they are rather old models, to promote that it has the capacity to block off all of South Korea's shores.
The documentary also showed recent footage of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visiting with female troop units and encouraging other tank units in their night training. North Korea's state television also showed the inside of Kim's private plane. Experts say North Korea is using the documentary to flaunt its self-defense capabilities. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-yong live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and the Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Well, the chief of Korea's central bank says there are now higher expectations over the bank taking a more active role in sustainable growth and financial stability. Now, he was speaking at a conference this Monday, and Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said the expectations were brought on by the 2008 global financial crisis. He added that more research is needed for the central bank to pursue different kinds of policy goals. Now, while Lee did say that global economy is on the path to recovery, slow growth in China and the high level of debt in Eurozone economies could pose a threat. Meanwhile, this is coming from Korea's trade ministry. It says progress is being made in bilateral free trade agreement talks with China. At an 11th round of talks in China's southwestern city of Meishan last week, the two countries discussed synchronizing their trade regulations. Now, in the area of competition, the head of the Korean delegation, Woo Tae-hee, said a consensus was nearly reached on e-commerce and that offers were exchanged with regard to the service sector. When the next round of FTA negotiations take place in Korea in July, Seoul is expected to offer market liberalization on the manufacturing front, particularly in the petrochemical, steel and machinery sectors. Beijing is expected to offer market liberalization on the agricultural front. Now, we already know that Koreans work some of the longest hours in the developed world, so you would hope retirement would mean some well-deserved rest, but that obviously is not the case. A new OECD report shows the average Korean is still punching the clock more than 10 years after the official retirement age. Song Ji-sun has more.
In Korea, you might retire from your main job, but that doesn't mean you're no longer working. That's the picture painted by the OECD's latest report on effective retirement age. The report notes the effective age of retirement is well below the official age for receiving a full pension in most countries. Some countries like Korea stick out, as while the official retirement age is 60, the effective age of retirement is over 70 for men. In many European countries, residents are actually retiring a good few years before their official retirement age of 65. Women in general retire a year or two earlier than men, but Korean women are also the ones working the longest after retirement, trailing only Chile. Korean women are working just as many years as men, effectively retiring at 70. Analysts say the figures clearly indicate how many Koreans cannot live on their pensions or savings alone, so they have to search for a new job in their golden years. Government data shows more than half of Korean men in their 60s were economically active last year, with 29% of women in the same age group taking part in economy. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, the 2014 FIFA World Cup in Brazil is less than 2 weeks away, but the spotlight is under the 22 World Cup. Qatar was supposed to host that, but it has added another layer of controversy, and a British daily says it has proof that FIFA officials took bribes in the bidding process, and if that is proven true, a revote is likely. Our UDN has the details.
It was back in December 2010 when Qatar beat out Japan, the United States, Australia and Korea to host the 2022 World Cup.
I'm speechless because you see my voice. I lost my voice because I screamed so loud. But congratulations, Qatar. It deserved it.
But the bidding process for the global event was entrenched in corruption, according to the Sunday Times. The British Daily says it has obtained proof that Qatari official Mohammed bin Hammam paid FIFA officials $5 million while lobbying them to vote for Qatar. The Daily says it has hundreds of millions of emails, accounts, and documents that detail the payments. The revelations have FIFA facing calls to rerun the bidding competition for the 2022 World Cup. FIFA's Vice President Jim Boyce says he would support the move if the corruption allegations were indeed proven true. The decision to have Qatar host the World Cup had been at the center of controversy given its lack of footballing history, as well as its intense summer heat.
So I think many people were surprised when it went there. So I don't think they'll be surprised that perhaps there are suggestions that it wasn't all above board.
Qatar strongly denies the claims and insists that bin Hammam never had an official role in supporting the country's bid. Yurian, Arirang News.
And now it's time for our daily arts and culture segment. And of course, for that, our In Yoon Hee joins me live in the studio. Now today, she will join us for a closer look at a French artist who's known for his living drawings. So let's find out what that is. Good afternoon to you, Yoon Hee.
Good afternoon.
So before we head into our discussion, you would have to enlighten me and some of our viewers who do not know what this living drawings are.
Right, so these living drawings refer to huge steel cutouts that this French artist Bernard Venet does create. Now, he has been shown all over the world, and his works have been brought here to Korea with an exclusive look at some pieces that have never been seen before. So let's take a look.
He's an artist who takes inspiration from something rather unexpected. Bernard Venet looks to mathematics for his ideas, as he feels the two are beautifully related. His large steel creations have been seen in some of the world's most recognized museums, as they're considered avant-garde and of genius design in the field. They're all part of his Grib series, a collection of abstract scribbles he's been producing since 2011. And where it might look like complete chaos, comb through each piece and you'll see that mathematic figures, angles, circles, and arcs can be found in every inch of his creations.
It's a problem because it's terribly heavy, not easy to handle, dangerous also. But I think that the result is giving me some satisfaction today.
He's 73 years old, but shows no signs of slowing down, eager to share his 30 pieces of work, some of which have never been displayed to the public. From the same country, the land of art, come 6 more abstract artists. To some, it might look just like a few scribbles and blobs, but these artists are on the pioneering edge of their field, always discovering the new and the potential. A simplistic approach to the canvas sometimes inspires more ideas, but in any case, the variety of rather unique pieces are available to view here in Seoul.
Now, Uni, tell us more about the first artist that we saw, the French artist Bernard Venet, how he created his steel works of art.
So he is very well known for these steel works. So what he actually does is he creates hundreds and hundreds of sketches, and from there he chooses a few that he likes, and he'll actually project these onto huge steel sheets and cut them out from there. And that's where he says they become alive, because they go from these 2D sketches to these 3D huge creations.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think I do recall seeing him in Korea before. Is this his first time?
So he's pretty popular here in Korea. He has been here 3 times before this. In 2007, he was first brought to Korea to show his, I guess, mathematical artwork. Some people were very impressed by that. And so in 2010 and 2011, he was brought back. And this time, for the first time, he's showing his steel works here.
Now, what about let's move on to the second exhibition with the 6 artists, I believe.
Right.
Tell us more about that.
Right, so these artists, they really embody this sense of traditional art that you see in France. You know, France is known for so many of its artists, its styles and techniques that came from that country. So these artists, they embody that, but at the same time, they also are contemporary artists, and so they go for a more contemporary approach with contemporary styles. And so these artworks are very neat to see. You can kind of see the influences from the past, but you could also see how the present style of work has really changed.
So French artists and French art pieces, that seems to be the key word today, and a lot of those works are being exhibited here in Korea, so we should all go check it out. All right, well, thank you so much for that report today.
Always a pleasure.
Good afternoon. Now, today is the 5th day of the 5th month of the lunar calendar here in Korea, now known as Tano, and it's finally raining, which has brought down the temperatures by between 5 to 12 degrees depending on where you are. Now, with that, our daytime highs are back into the 20s. Now, despite the rain that's coming down across most parts of the nation, there is a dry weather warning in effect over in Gangwon-do province, which will come to an end with the rain that's coming tomorrow. Now, today today's rain is mainly focused over in Jeju Island, where heavy rain warnings are in effect. Up to 80 millimeters of precipitation are forecast there, and Seoul can expect light amount of rain of 5 to 10 millimeters. Now going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 25 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 22 and 24 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 23, Dokdo at 24, while Mangkhung-gun tops out at 19. Now that's all for Korea. Now here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's just about all for me at this hour. I'm Moon Gun-young. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.